So if you want any discussion, if you have any suggestion to give, we'll discuss. Otherwise, I will just take up a topic from this book. I will read just one section from this book, this condensed gospel. This was the original version which M himself translated from Bengali into English. First brought out 1907 by M himself. So his own translation from original Bengali into English. This is an interesting subject at the beginning itself. We should just take it up and then you can suggest your own topics. Here's a very interesting subject that Sri Ramakrishna is discussing. The problem of evil. Are all men equal? Means are all human beings equal in that sense? A disciple is putting a question to Sri Ramakrishna. Very simple question. Maybe that all of us sometimes discuss the subject. Sir, why are there bad men or bad human beings in God's world? Why is there evil in this world? A very simple question. It's a theological and also philosophical question. How can we reconcile with these two ideas of a compassionate God and a cruel world? A God who is good, who is compassionate, who is all-merciful. Then why should He create a world which is full of evil things, unpleasant experiences? Why should there be evil at all? Misery, sufferings, disease, famine, all these problems. Why can't God create a problem-free world? A perfect world? Before starting the discussion, I will just point out a Vedantic view, then come to the subject. In Vedanta philosophy, a perfect world is a contradiction in terms. The world can never be perfect. If the world becomes perfect, it will cease to be the world. That's the idea behind. Because there is only one reality which is perfect. That is Brahman, Atman, consciousness. You may, from a theistic point of view, you can call it God. So, the world as such can never be perfect. It's like asking for a coin which has only one side. There cannot be a coin with only one side. A coin will have two sides. Similarly, world will have both good and bad, positive and negative. But then this is not often understood by many of us. When there is a problem in our life, and when we read books describing God as the embodiment of mercy, compassion, a God who creates this world, who looks after His creation. Well, there is an incompatibility between a compassionate, all-merciful God and a world which is not perfect. So that's a question which a disciple is putting to Sri Ramakrishna. It's a very common sense question and also it's a highly philosophical question. The Master says, Sri Ramakrishna says, in God's creation, diversity is the universal rule. There must be evil as well as good. Again, there are various kinds of objects, animals, plants, minerals, and so on. Among animals again, there are some which are very gentle, very inoffensive, and others which, like the tiger, are ferocious and live upon other animals. Some trees bring forth good fruits, sweet as nectar. Some others bring forth poisonous fruits, which cause death. Likewise, there are good men and bad men. That means good women and also bad women. Holy men and those who are sinful. Some again are just and devout, and others are attached to the world. So this is the idea behind. Means this general condition of the world from a purely metaphysical point of view. The world as world can never be perfect. The world in Sanskrit is called Jagat. Jagat means something which goes on changing, moving, which is in a flux, which is never in a stable condition. So good and bad, or what we call good and bad, come and go. Now here Sri Ramakrishna, to drive home this point further, gives a detailed analysis of humanity in general, depending upon their spiritual characteristics. Sri Ramakrishna says people can be divided into 4 classes. The worldly men, those who are bound in the fetters of the world. The seekers after liberation, those who are convinced that there cannot be perfect happiness in this world, and those who are fed up with this imperfect world, with the sufferings and enjoyments, and those who are trying to seek a way out of this world full of problems, seekers after liberation, and the liberated and ever free. Those who are worldly minded, and those who enjoy bondage, those who want to live in a state of perpetual worldly mindedness, those who enjoy being worldly minded. They have no idea of liberation or spiritual growth. For them, world alone is real. Matter alone is real. What is visible, what we enjoy with the senses, is the only reality. They have no idea, even intellectually, they have no idea of anything beyond what they see and experience with their senses and mind. Worldly minded people. Then there are seekers after liberation. Those who know that the world cannot bring us eternal good. The world, if you live in the world, you may be happy for some time, but you will have to be unhappy at some other time. If you seek happiness, you will not always get it. It means you will have to bear unhappiness. So they want to get out of this, those who are seekers after liberation. The third category, the liberated. Those who are fully convinced about the reality of the world, or rather the unreality of the world. The reality of the world is that it is unreal. That's the idea. The real condition of the world is that it can never be real. It is always in a flux. Now, they naturally seek liberation, and they get liberated through sincere effort, God's grace, by practicing meditation, and through spiritual practices, they become liberated. The fourth category, they don't have to seek liberation, they are ever free. Nitya Mukta is called. So, liberated are the Muktas in Sanskrit, those who are liberated already. And the fourth category, the ever free Nitya Muktas. And those who are seeking liberation are called Mumuksha, means those mumukshus, those who are aspirants for spiritual enlightenment. And there are those who enjoy being worldly, who enjoy living in this world, who think that matter is the only reality, sensory enjoyment is the only thing to be aimed at, to be sought after. Now here Sri Ramakrishna gives examples. The ever free are the great sages like Narada, and the seekers, the great seekers after liberation, those who are struggling to get spiritual liberation. They take to spiritual life, they practice meditation, contemplation, reading of scriptures, and they slowly progress. And there are those who have reached the level of spiritual enlightenment, the liberated, and there are those who don't need any effort on their part because they are already liberated. They can never become worldly minded. They can live in this world and still be free. They can watch the phenomenon of worldly life as a spectator watching the drama being played on the stage. On the stage, the actors may cry, weep, may laugh, but the spectators, those who are watching the drama, are not affected. Similarly, they can watch their own life as a drama. They can stand outside the platform and watch the drama of their own life as if it is going on in a stage. And Sri Ramakrishna gives a very funny and interesting example here. He takes an illustration, from catching fish, the illustration of catching fish. Most of the fish are caught in the net. Somebody, see a fisherman trying to catch fish, going to a pool, trying to catch fish with a fish net. And then what happens? Most of the fish are caught in the nets. And what happens? Those fish which are caught in the nets, they try to play and enjoy without knowing that soon their life will come to an end. The fisherman will empty the net and will cook it and may eat it. But they don't know that. They think they are in a wonderful place. They are caught in the nets. There may be some mud and dust, filth, all this will be there in the net. So they will be playing in the muddy pool within the net, thinking that's a very wonderful place. And they will hide, thinking that nobody can catch them, without knowing that they are already within the nets. So Sri Ramakrishna says worldly minded people are like that. So such people cannot even withstand a few minutes of spiritual discourse. They cannot read a holy book without feeling some terrible pain somewhere. They get terribly bored. Just as those who are spiritually oriented cannot withstand worldly mindedness, popular pop music, please don't mind, things like that. Similarly, those who are so much into the pop music cannot withstand devotional singing going on somewhere. So both ways you can find. So Sri Ramakrishna says, now within the net there are different types of fishes. That's what he says. Within the net there are some fish which try to get out of the nets. They are seekers of liberation and they succeed. A few may just jump out of the nets. They succeed. So there are people who, being fed up with the worldly minded life, at least when they get blows, suddenly they open their eyes and they take up a holy book, a spiritual classic, may read, may go to a place of worship, may listen to spiritual discourses, or at least will sit somewhere in their own room and maybe in a lonely place and think of what is the end of all this. Is there a higher goal in human life? Now, those people are like the fish which are trying to get out of the net, and some of them do succeed. They are seekers and finally they become liberated. So a few will succeed in jumping out of the net, and most of them will not succeed. They are caught by the fisherman and they die. When Sri Ramakrishna says there are some fish whom the fisherman will never succeed in catching, they never get caught. Those who are experts in catching fish may be able to go further, and there are maybe some varieties of fish, some species which cleverly escape being caught by the fishermen. So Sri Ramakrishna says we often see such, they leap up with a splash. So those who are seekers of liberation are like the fish which jump out of the net. And then the fisherman and also others watching the whole spectacle will shout, "Look, there's a big fish getting away." But Sri Ramakrishna says, but most of the fish are not able to get out at all. And what is more, they do not want to get out. Now, even to have desire to get out of the nets, out of this world, worldliness rather, worldly mindedness. For that we need some samskaras. Yesterday I was referring to this subject, A little bit of spiritual practice will remain registered in somewhere in a corner of our heart. Yesterday I was mentioning Arjuna's question and Krishna's promise in the 6th chapter of the Gita. Arjuna is putting a question. Ayadi Shraddhayopedo yoga chalidamana saha aprapi yoga samsiddhim kam gadim Krishna gacchati. Arjuna is putting a question. What about those who are caught by the fishermen, or who try to jump out of the net but don't succeed? Maybe the fisherman may catch it back and put it back in the net. So what about those people who are spiritual seekers, who fail or who die before they succeed? So Sri Krishna says, even a little attempt to jump out of the net of worldliness will register a strong tendency in the mind, and the next life this tendency will come to the surface. So in the Gita, Krishna makes a very interesting illustration. Tatradam buddhi samyogam labhate paurodekikam labhate cha tato bhuya samsiddho kurudantina. This is Krishna's promise. Before that he said, anybody who makes a little effort for spiritual progress will never perish. Whatever little effort they make will produce its result, its fruit, and that will benefit them. Then Krishna says, while describing how this really happens in our life, what he says is this. Suppose a person practices meditation, japa or contemplation or reading of holy scriptures for some time, maybe for some years, maybe for a few days perhaps in his or her life, and then die. If he dies, and then next life what happens? He may have to go through many experiences, not always pleasant experiences. But in spite of all unpleasant experiences, the tendency, the impression which is already registered in the mind at the time of doing some good spiritual practice in previous life, which is related to the previous body. Paurodehika means something which is related to your previous life, not this body. In your previous life, you have done something. Buddhism yogam, that impression, that tendency that you have accumulated by some spiritual practice, whatever it may be. It could be that praying once in life, in all sincerity. As Sri Ramakrishna said yesterday, praying in solitude immediately registers an impression in the mind, not congregational prayer. That's why Sri Ramakrishna stressed the importance of praying in solitude. If a person prays in solitude, not in the company of others, but in the company of God only, nobody else, then what happens? The impression, the tendency is registered with such intensity that it will remain there. On the other hand, if you practice contemplation in groups where you may not feel that degree of intensity, the impression will not be registered so strongly. The intensity of the impression will be much less. But if a person has prayed only once in his or her life and then dies, in next life what happens? When he comes in contact with this similar spiritual idea. It may be while going to a temple or a church, maybe reading a book, maybe talking to some spiritual persons. This idea will suddenly come to the surface of the mind. And then this idea, this tendency will help him to go ahead, to start where he has left in the previous life. So the spiritual life continues, the search continues. So, in spiritual effort, whatever little we have done in the past life will always come to our rescue. And that will help us to get out of this net of worldliness. But then Sri Ramakrishna says, there are some fish, they would rather rush into the mud at the bottom of the net itself, thinking that they are in a very wonderful, beautiful place, without knowing that soon they will be killed. And head foremost entangled in the net as they are, and there lie still, thinking all the while, we are quite safe and secure, we need fear no more, without knowing that they are going to die very soon. The poor things know not that in a short while the fisherman will draw them in the net to the land. This is an old, you have to remember, Yam himself translated from Bengali into English, maybe in the year 1907. It's an old style of English, but with slight modification. Practically the language remains more or less intact. Now Sri Ramakrishna says, to this last may be compared the worldly. I mean, those who are worldly minded and living in the world without knowing that they are worldly minded. Others who try to get out of the net, those who are trying to seek liberation, know that there is a higher life. There is something higher to be sought after, to strive for. But those who are worldly minded do not know that there is something higher than living in a state of perpetual worldly mindedness. They feel secure in their muddy homes, but alas, they are entangled in the meshes of the world, soon to be deprived of the water of life and hauled up to the land to be killed. The bondage of the world is bondage made up of the fetters of lust and greed, desire, and all other related human tendencies can be put under this category. Worldly men are bound hand and foot. They think they will find peace and rest and security in the mud at the bottom of the tank, that is to say, in worldly minded desires. They know not that these cause death of the soul. They know not that these cause death in the soul. When one of these worldly men is on his deathbed, his wife says to him, "You are departing from this world, but what property do you have? Do you leave to me?" The wife speaks not one word about the Lord. So, because that's what the husband has taught the wife, and wife doesn't need anything more. So, where is your will? Where is the paper? Where have you hidden it? That may be the question the wife may be asking. This can happen. The wife is dying, the husband also may ask the wife the same question. It could be the other ways also. So, the dying man himself is so much attached to the world that the light of a lamp burning in the sick room troubles him, and he cries out, "Who is there? See that not more than one wick is burned." Greed, that's the reason. And that no more oil is wasted than is absolutely needed. So even at the time of death, that person doesn't realize that there is a higher life, something higher than living in this world with all the pleasures. So this is a classic example of those who are living in a state of perpetual worldly mindedness. For them, Brahman is unreal, world is real. For the ever liberated, Brahman or Atman or God, whatever you may call, is the only reality. The world is only relative, sometimes called unreal in the absolute sense. For the highest, God is only reality. For the lowest, matter is only reality, and God is unreal. Now, how to slowly climb up the ladder? The first step is to try to get out of the net, become a seeker of something higher than the sensory world. If we can't turn to God, we can turn to something which will take us away from the world of senses. It could be poetry, it could be painting, which will take our mind towards God. Need not necessarily be a religious book. At the next stage, one can start reading a holy book, which is still better. The worldly man doesn't think of God. If he has time and nothing to do, he will either talk empty twaddle or do things that are of no use to anybody. Upon being asked, he says, "To sit still I am not able, hence I am planting a hedge." So Sri Ramakrishna is sometimes very humorous. He says there are people who will tell you, "Well, I am such a wonderful man that I can't keep quiet 1 minute. I have to be active all the time." I said this is a great compliment. But actually, workaholism is as much a curse as lethargy and laziness. Workaholism is as much a kind of slavery to our senses of action, as lethargy. Both are two types of slavery at the sensory level. So Sri Ramakrishna's time hangs heavy on his hands, so he must play at cards or at dice. Deep silence. Sometimes Sri Ramakrishna's words created a very touching atmosphere, sometimes a very frightful atmosphere in the room where he is giving these instructions. Because the reality of this tyranny of the senses, the tyranny of worldly mindedness, and how it captivates human mind, how it enslaves human life, all are brought up here. Now I shall conclude this version, this part of the book, with one illustration that is from one of our great spiritual classics. It was written by a great sage Vyasa. The work is called Bhagavata Purana. It's a very wonderful, revealing work. In a way, this work is nothing but an answer to a question put by a great saintly king to a great sage. It comes in the first chapter of the Bhagavata Purana. There's a background story behind. A great king, his name is Parikshit. Historically, he is said to have been the grandson of Arjuna. Now, he was a great king, an enlightened man, but somehow he happened to commit a heinous sin by mistake. One day he went out hunting in a forest. He got hungry and thirsty, and he reached a hermitage where he found an old sage sitting in meditation. The king was very hungry and thirsty. He wanted to take rest. He wanted drinking water. And he was expecting the sage to get up from his seat and welcome him and offer him some drinking water. But the sage was immersed in meditation. He didn't get up. He didn't know the king had reached there. But the king thought the sage was so arrogant, was completely ignoring his arrival. Because of hunger and thirst, perhaps he lost his balance. He got angry. Hunger sometimes makes us angry, So he looked around and he found a dead snake lying somewhere. He took that dead snake and he put it in the neck of that great sage, and he went away. After some time, this sage's son sages, you have to remember, they were not monks. They were mostly what we call in Sanskrit vanaprasthins. Those who have lived a pure householder's life. Both husband and wife will go to forest after maybe 50, 60 years. They will stay in a forest hermitage, spending the rest of their lifetime in meditation and contemplation. So he was such a great sage. So his son came after some time, and he found somebody had put a dead snake in the neck of his father. The son got angry. He was also a man of great spiritual powers. So he cursed the person who had done this terrible, heinous crime. The one who has done this to my father, he will die on the 7th day from now. He will be beaten by a snake and he will be dead on the 7th day. This was the curse. Now, after some time, the sage opened his eyes. Then he came to know what his son had done, cursing the king. He was a noble king, was a well-known administrator, known for his philanthropy, for all his kingly virtues. But when he got hungry and thirsty, he lost his balance and he happened to do something which he should never have done. He would not have done otherwise. So the sage became very much upset. So he sent this emissary to the king to inform him. See, by mistake, my arrogant son had cursed you. He has cursed you, and you are going to die on the 7th day. You will be bitten by a snake. Now, how this king received this news? He was very happy. For one thing, he felt that he had done something terribly wrong. He had insulted a great sage. And then again, so he deserved this punishment. And then another thought was, I have only 7 days to live. Now, the fact that he was going to die on the 7th day did not make him upset, did not alarm him. See, how we react to the reality of death. It's a very interesting subject here. Death for an enlightened person is a creative crisis. It is not something scary, something to be afraid of. It is something that we can take in our stride for a spiritually enlightened person. For a worldly minded person who thinks this body is the only thing, death is the end of everything. It is the end of the road. It is something terrifying, because after that there is complete emptiness. It is the end of it. It is a precipice after that. So, but the king was a very learned person. So what he did, he left, he renounced his kingdom, his comforts, his palace, his relations, and he declared his son, Janamejaya, that's the name of his son, as the heir apparent, and went to the banks of Ganga. And he decided to spend the rest of his lifetime, 7 days, in meditation and contemplation. So many great sages came to know of this story. So they came to the place where the king was practicing meditation. And the greatest of them, of those sages who assembled on the banks of Ganga, was Shuka, who is a teacher, the instructor of Bhagavata Purana, this spiritual classic. Now the king puts a question to Shuka, the great sage. The question is this: Atha prichami samsiddhim yoginam paramam gurum purusha sehayat karyam mriyamanasya sarvatha. This comes in the first chapter of the first skandha, it is called, first book, the 18th chapter, the first book of the Bhagavata Purana. So I am putting a question to you. What should a dying man do? That's the question. So what should a man whom death is staring at his face, icy hands of death catching you behind the throat. That's a poem, great classical poem is there in English language. The icy hands of death. Now, how do you react to the reality of death? It's very interesting. In a way, the mystery of death is not different from the mystery of life. Because death signifies the end of this body. It also signifies the reality of something which remains intact after the body is no more. So, the king puts his question, you are the great guru, great teacher. See, Mriyamanasya Purushasya Yat Karyam, this is Sanskrit prose order. What should a man whom death is staring at his face do? He continues the question, Yat Kartavyam, Bhajaniyam, Smartavyam, Japim, whom he should meditate, how he should do his duties, and what he should think and contemplate on, how he should practice his spiritual sadhanas. All these questions come one after another. Now, in the second book, Shuka gives an answer. In fact, the whole classic, the spiritual classic, which is a huge work, divided into 12 sections, is an answer to this question. But it is an answer to the question about the mystery of human life, not of death. Remember, this discussion, the subject of discussion, the topic of discussion is not death, but life. But the best way to know the mystery of life is to know the mystery of death. Because life continues after death. Life continues after this body is no more. There is something which continues to exist even after this body is no more. Now, in the second chapter, Shuka gives the answer. The answer is this in Sanskrit. Edavan Sankhya Yogabhyam Swadharma Parinishtaya Janma Labha Parapumsam Ante Narayana Smriti. This is a great Sanskrit verse. The meaning is this. Somehow you should be able to leave this world with a smile on your face. And this is possible only if you can think of something other than this body and mind, which all come to an end. If you can put your heart, you can fix your mind on something other than these perishable entities, body, mind, and so on. If you can contemplate on something which is imperishable and immortal, which continues to live and exist even after death, then that is the greatest goal of human life. So, Ante Narayana Smriti literally means one should be able to leave this world with contemplation on God, with remembrance of God. And this you can practice, this you can achieve by the practice of action without desire. Do whatever you do that without any selfish motive as an offering to God, so that all actions become an act of worship, all thoughts become an act of meditation, the whole world becomes temple, whole life becomes spiritualized. As I said yesterday, the secular and spiritual converging, merging into one. This, or you can contemplate on the absolute reality, that is Sankhya means Jnana. Karma Yoga is one path, as I explained now. Or you can think of this phenomenal world. This external world with all the manifold phenomenal entities, including our body, they are all perishable. There is something beyond all this which is imperishable. That is the Atman, the Supreme Consciousness. This is one path. Or you can surrender yourself to God, as Sri Ramakrishna said yesterday we discussed, self-surrender, bhakti or devotion. So through devotion, or through the path of knowledge, or through the path of selfless action, or through the path of mind control of the senses and mind, if you can leave this world with a smile, and this is possible only if you remember something which doesn't die with death, it doesn't die with this body. the immortal, eternal reality, Atman or God. That is the goal of human life. This is the answer given by the great sage. Now, and Parikshit did that. Now, Sri Ramakrishna says in this context, in Gospel you find again and again, in Bengali sometimes called Ishwari Vastu, means God is the only reality. God is the only supreme reality. That's what Sri Ramakrishna says. And everyone should try to live with one hand clutching the feet of the Lord and the other hand engaged in doing one's duties and responsibilities. This is one way to try to get out of the net of worldliness. And then he says, there are people who reach this goal, they are the liberated, and then there are those who are born liberated. He gives the example of the great sages of ancient times. So we have already discussed one topic. If you want me to discuss anything related to this, you can ask questions and we'll continue the discussion, or I shall take up another topic. So now we can open up the discussion.
You just said born liberated. Why did they need a birth if they are liberated?
Oh yes, the answer is this, Nitya Muktas, those who are ever liberated, they are born again to help others, to help them, to guide them along the path of spiritual life. There is no special purpose. Whatever they do will not affect them. Whatever karmas they do will not affect them. Whatever they do will be for the good of others. There are great spiritual personalities. Whatever they do, unconsciously or consciously, turns out to be for the good of others. That's the characteristic of Nitya Muktas. So we ask the question, why they are born at all? There is no reason why they should be born, and there is no reason why they should not be born. That's the answer. So ultimately the answer is, whatever they do, it turns out to be for the good of others. There are great people like that.
Swamiji, in the description of the fish that you had, it seems as though each fish is just of one type. That means I'm liberated versus I'm stuck in the mud. But oftentimes as we go through life, we feel we are being different fish at different points in time. What does that mean?
No, those who are born liberated are like the fish which never enter the net at all. It means they never become worldly minded, like the ever liberated we discussed just now. Right. Sri Ramakrishna gives the example of Narada and other great sages of ancient times. In fact, if you read the story of Narada, he had a past. He had earlier births in which he was not liberated. Mm-hmm. Even he had to go through this cycle of constant striving and practices. And then he became a mukta. But they belong to a very high level of spiritually liberated souls who take birth again and again just to guide others. In the case of normal human beings, very often we have a fundamental orientation. We always feel we have an orientation. Most people are engaged in their different professional responsibilities and duties. Along with that, they also strive to progress in spiritual life, evolve in spiritual life. So naturally they are seekers. Unless they become seekers, the idea of liberation, the idea of combining professional duties and responsibilities and spiritual pursuit will not occur to them. They will be perfectly happy. Even the idea, intellectually speaking, even the idea of liberation or spiritual progress will be practically totally irrelevant to those people. As I said yesterday, they cannot even intellectually withstand a talk or a lecture on spiritual topics. So the very fact that people take interest in spiritual discussions or reading spiritual books or debating or contemplating on spiritual ideas is a strong indication that they are seekers. So they're caught in the net, but they don't enjoy being within the net. So they want to get out of the net. Why? Because they have realized that if they remain within the net, they will die. The fisherman will kill them. So they want to avoid being killed. So they want to jump out of the net. That's the case of spiritual seekers. So technically speaking, the very idea of getting out of the net will not occur to a fish which feels perfectly happy within the net. There is an element of unhappiness, dissatisfaction, which is divine discontentment, it is called. I mean, at least an intellectual desire for something higher, which is not empirical. That is the secret of seeking liberation. This idea.
You said that work itself can be binding, workaholics.
Yes.
But sometimes in our daily life, in our professions, etc., we have the worldly life, we have attachments. It's very easy to say, okay, we detach and work on this, work on that spiritual seekership.
Yes.
But duties also bind you. So sometimes it's sort of a yo-yoing, back and forth.
Of course. Here Sri Ramakrishna is referring to a person who says that he can't keep quiet, so he is erecting a fence around his home. There are already a fence is there, but he can't keep quiet for a minute. So he is a slave to his senses. Not a person for whom duty is very important, who wants to do his duty or her duty or responsibility. Sri Ramakrishna is referring to a person who just cannot keep quiet. It's another illustration you get in the same gospel, not in this book, the bigger book you find. A king requested the Bhagavata Pandit. Bhagavata is a holy book, Sanskrit scholar, to come to his palace and read. But that man said, I am busy now. I am busy erecting a fence around my home. Then the king said, a person who can read Bhagavata and expound the holy book, but finds greater pleasure in erecting a fence, I don't want him to come and read Bhagavata in front of him. So it's a matter of human evolution, If that Bhagavata teacher is a real teacher, he will not miss that chance of expounding the holy book. But he says, no, I have no time now, I am doing something else. Now if he is erecting the fence around a garden and goats and cattle are coming and eating up then it's all right. But there is no need of erecting a fence at that moment. Still he would rather erect a fence, do some physical labor instead of expounding the holy book. The king said, you better don't take the trouble. So technically speaking, workaholism here, I use the word to imply a peculiar attitude. People who claim to be very active and who rather remain always physically engaged in some activities and being proud of that and thinking that itself as the ultimate goal of human life. I'm talking about, Sri Ramakrishna is referring to that category of people. I hope it's clear.
Yeah, sometimes.
But on the other hand, people who have to be always active in professional duties and responsibilities, they can certainly turn their work, their karma into karma yoga. Because if it is a duty, they have to do that. You cannot run away from your duties. Then that duty can be converted into duty or action without desire. It becomes karma yoga and becomes a straight royal highway to liberation. So work can become a royal highway leading to ultimate liberation if it becomes unselfish work, karma yoga. Karma itself, the karma yoga is called. Roga means disease, sickness. So it should not become a workaholism. There we become slaves. We live under the tyranny of duty consciousness. If duty consciousness becomes a tyrant, then we must try to get out of it. If duty becomes a tyrant, it becomes a kind of spiritual slavery. If duty is a pleasant companion, then we can live with that. But if duty becomes a tyrant, then we must try to change our attitude. Not that we should run away from duties, but very often the mind deceives us. Sometimes this is stated in the Patanjali Yoga Sutra. Sometimes, we become reluctant to practice meditation and contemplation. It is not a very pleasant thing to do for a beginner. But being always engaged in our professional duties and responsibilities is not so demanding from a psychological point of view. It's something we have been doing for decades. We can do that. So very often mind tries to play a game. Oh, it's my duty, I should do that. Better don't meditate. Meditation we can do later. So their mind is actually playing a double game. That we have to be careful about. So duty sometimes can become a tyrant and a deceiver. He plays games with our mind. That we have to guard against. Yes.
Family situation, duty to your family.
Yes. Then it is certainly not a tyrant. Then it becomes our duty and responsibility. But we have to be careful about duty becoming a tyrant. Yatishwaranandaji in meditation and spiritual practice, he directly confronts this question in a slightly different style. He says there are many people who tell you, well, I have no time to meditate, I have no time to practice spiritual sadhanas because I have so much of things to do as part of my professional duties and responsibilities. Then Yadiswaranji says, why can't they take 5 minutes after their breakfast, maybe spending half an hour, 45 minutes, 10 minutes, take it out. And then 5 or 10 minutes from something else. And then altogether somehow accumulate some 30 or 40 minutes every day and devote that time to meditation. We won't do that because sometimes we want to avoid the unpleasant and avoid the unpleasant and the unfamiliar and concentrate on the pleasant and the familiar. What we have been practicing for decades is perfectly natural to us, so we can do that. Meditation and contemplation may not be very easy to practice for a beginner. So mind sometimes tells, well, meditation we can postpone, but these things cannot be postponed. So that kind of game mind plays. So that's why in such context we must intensify our search, our desire for spiritual growth. That intensity of desire, mumukshutvam, it called desire for liberation, intense desire for liberation or spiritual enlightenment will kill the lethargy and the duplicity of mind, the game the mind is playing, and help us to give a new orientation to spiritual life. That's Yadiswaranandaji's answer to this problem.
Swami, when you first talked about evil, you said that if the world became perfect, the world would disappear because it would just be Brahman, Satchidananda. Well, actually, that sounds pretty good. And so, why is there Purusha and Prakriti?
Yes, the answer is world by itself cannot be perfect. That's the idea behind. World cannot be perfect. So according to Vedanta, Brahman or Atman, of a monotheistic sense perspective, God is the only thing that is perfect. Everything else is imperfect. There is some degree of imperfection in everything other than Atman, the Supreme Consciousness. So, very often we feel there is so much of evil in this world because we expect a world which is completely free from any kind of problems. The moment we understand the world itself, world by its very nature cannot be problem free, then we won't feel the problem is so very intense. It doesn't mean that we should not strive to solve the problems, no. But the idea that this problem is unbearable. The world where we want a better world, we want a perfect world, we want a world there is no problem, everyone is healthy, everyone is perfect, there is no inequality. See, this question was raised by many agnostics in the last decades of 19th century. In fact, that's the beginning of agnostic movement late in 19th century. Why should God create an imperfect world? A world in which His own creation, human beings, have to suffer? Basic question. Buddha answered it's because of desire. Without the help of a transcendental moral authority, without depending upon a God, creator God, Buddha said it is because of desire. Desire is Trishna, we called it. And that's responsible, our desire for worldly things, that is responsible for the imperfections in this world. Vedanta says the world by its very nature is imperfect. So we need not be alarmed by that. But not that we should not try to solve the problems or encounter the problems. The world by its very nature cannot be perfect.
Why is there any world at all? Why didn't Brahman just stay?
Yeah. Yes.
Swamiji, that episode in Ramayana where Sita asks Rama the same question. So Rama as an illusion creates a perfect world.
Yes, that's the end of, yes. Of course, that story, yes, that, where everything is perfect. Well, suppose your machinery, your furniture in your home never goes wrong, then how will electricians survive? If there is no disease, how will doctors survive? If there is no litigation, how will lawyers survive, attorneys survive? That's the extension of Rama's answer to Sita. But from a purely ontological point of view, Vedanta gives a very interesting answer. The world is inexplicable. That's the metaphysical answer from an ontological point of view. Because why should there be this world? So if you ask the question, why should God create this world? What's the purpose of creation, as you stated? The answer in Vedanta is, it is a spot, Leela we call it in Sanskrit, Leela. Logavattu Leela Kaivalyam is a famous sutra in Brahma Sutras. Means, why should there be an imperfect world? If you play volleyball as a hobby, and if somebody asks you, why should you play volleyball? There is no answer for you to give. You may play something else otherwise. But if you are a professional volleyball player, that becomes a means for your livelihood. You have an answer. I have to practice. Then only I will be selected in the team. So there is a cause-effect relationship. But if you, at evening, if you half an hour, if you walk in the beach, if somebody asks you, why are you walking the beach? Your answer is, why can't I walk in the beach? Why are you playing volleyball? Why can't I play? I will something else you will do. So there is no question, why do you have this hobby? Leela or sport, there is no question. The question why is relevant only if there is a plan behind, there is a deliberation behind. But there is no plan or a scheme behind hobby. Similarly, Vedantic answer is, this is how it is. This is Vedantic answer. So it means inexplicable. A child playing something. Why are you playing like this? Child has no answer to give. Any more than you who may play volleyball. After working in the office for 12 hours, you may play volleyball for half an hour. It's hobby. But if you are a professional volleyball player, it becomes your duty and responsibility. There is a question, why? Because I want to get selected in that team. So there is no relevance for the question why when it is described as a sport, Leela. So similarly, the answer in Vedanta is, the world is like that. Because ultimately, that I don't want to take you to that level. In the Advaita Vedanta, world is unreal. I don't want to go beyond this limit. You can that Mandukya classes and all that you can see. That will be going away from the immediate context of the book. Now, anything else? Otherwise, I shall take up another subject. Any other discussion, if you want. Here, there is a discussion between Swamiji and Sri Ramakrishna. Swamiji, at that time, was a student. He was studying most probably in the Scottish Church College. So, I'm not sure, maybe Presidency College. He was a young student who had started visiting Sri Ramakrishna. The topic is the doctrine of non-resistance. This is the topic. Now, Narendranath Datta, that was Swamiji's name. Should we hold our peace if evil men come to offend us, or actually do so? Sri Ramakrishna's answer is, a man living in society, especially as a citizen and an householder, should make a show of resisting evil for the sake of self-defense. At the same time, care should be taken to avoid paying back evil for evil. This is the answer. This is a very serious problem for sincere spiritual seekers, because all scriptures teach us to practice non-violence, to practice pacifism in our attitude. We should not offend anyone, we should not react, we should always, sometimes, we should take everything lying down. That's a very, very wrong misinterpretation of both ahimsa doctrine and also everything else. Now, here the basic principle in Vedantic tradition is if non-resistance produces more evil, then resistance is inevitable, necessary. If non-resistance of evil produces more evil, then resistance is always preferable. But violence in the name of resistance is not accepted. This is the basic principle. Now, Sri Ramakrishna gives a very interesting illustration here. In a field, certain cowboys kept watch over their cattle. In that same field was a terrible and venomous serpent. One day, there came a holy man that way. The boys ran up to him and said, "Your Holiness, please go not that way." You have to remember, this is an old English, Young's own translation into English of his original Bengali version. "A tremendous snake is over there. My children, said the holy man, I thank you, but I am not afraid of your snake. I know some holy texts that will keep me from harm of all kinds. So saying, he wended his way in that direction. The boys did not go with him. They were so much afraid of the snake. At the sight of the holy man, the snake came swiftly towards him with its hood raised. The holy man muttered a spell, some sacred mantra, sacred words, and the snake fell at his feet as helpless as an earthworm. Well, said the holy man, why do you go about doing evil to others? Let me give you a holy name of God. Repeat this holy name always, and you will learn to love God. You will see Him in the end. You will realize God in the end. The desire to do evil to others will at the same time leave you. The snake had the holy name whispered into its ear. It bowed down before its preceptor and said, O Lord, what more must I do in order to get salvation? The snake is putting in question the holy man. The holy man said, repeat the holy name, said the teacher, and do not harm to any living thing. I shall come again and see how you fare. So saying, he went his way. Some days passed. The cowboys noticed that the snake would not bite. It won't do any harm to anyone. So they pelted it with stones, but it only looked as meek and inoffensive as an earthworm. One of the boys took it one day by the tail and whirling it round, dashed it several times against the ground. The snake vomited blood, was stunned and left for dead. Late at night, it came to life again. Softly and slowly it moved and dragged itself into its hole. Its body was broken. In the course of a few days, it was reduced to a skeleton, and it was many, many days before it could even come out of its hole to look for food. For fear of the boys, it would not come out during the daytime. It would come out only by night. Ever since its initiation by the holy man, it had ceased to do any harm to any creature. It tried to live as well as it could on leaves of plants and things of that kind. The holy man soon came back. He looked about, seeking the snake, but in vain. At last the boy said that it was no more. It was hard for the holy man to believe this, for he knew that the name of the Lord, which it repeated, carried such spiritual power that death was out of question before the problem of life had been solved. That is to say, before it had seen God. So the holy man made a search and called it repeatedly by its name. The snake came out of its hole and bowed down before its preceptor. They talked to each other. This is a dialogue between the holy man and the snake. That's next follows. The holy man, hello, how are you doing? Snake's answer, oh Lord, I thank you. By the grace of God, I am quite well. It was broken, it was half dead, it had become a skeleton, but he says perfectly all right. So, the holy man, how is it that you are brought down to mere skin and bone? What's the matter? Snake, Lord, in obedience to your bidding, I strive to do no harm to any living creature. I feed upon leaves and things of that kind. Thus, it may be that I am thinner than before. Holy man, well, I am afraid it's not the food alone that has brought you to this pass. There must be something else to do with it. Just think it over. The snake, oh, now I see it all. Even the snake had forgotten what all violence these cowboys had done to it. That's the level of sattva guna, the level he has reached. The cowherds dealt with me rather severely one day. They held me by the tail and dashed me against the ground with great force several times. They, poor fellows, had no idea what a great change had come over me. How could they know that I was not going to bite anyone or do them the least harm? Holy man seeks, he didn't congratulate him. Holy man's answer, what nonsense! You must be an idiot not to know how to save yourself from being handled in such a fashion by your enemies. What I forbade you was to bite any of God's creatures. Why did you not hiss at those who wanted to kill you so as to put them in fear of you? So very often, sometimes when we get spiritual instructions, sometimes we go to extremes in one direction without clearly understanding its implication. That's what really happens. And then when we find the result is not very desirable, then we become frustrated with spirituality as a whole. It happens. There are many people. I practiced spirituality, I practiced religion, I did so much of spiritual practice, still no result, so I'm going elsewhere, or I'm leaving. Many people become non-believers. That's because of immature understanding. So he can see this story gives a balance. When we get spiritual instruction, it's be understood in its proper perspective. Now, the discussion continues here. The problem of evil, are all men equal? A disciple, why are there bad men in God's world? Why is there evil? That's how the discussion, as I already discussed. So, as a continuation of this discussion, Sri Ramakrishna explained the characteristics of the worldly minded, the seekers, the liberated, and the ever free, the ever liberated. This is the style of Sri Ramakrishna's solving the problem. Now you can raise some topics for discussion if there is anything. Anything that you may have read, got this. It's always a problem. We read books, practice spirituality, and sometimes we feel that we are not getting the expected result. And then we turn away from it. Because, as I said yesterday, there is always, at the back of everything, the feeling that God is one whom we can employ to solve our problems. This concept is essentially related to all monotheistic religions, including popular Hinduism, Buddhism, Christianity, Islam, all religions. God becomes a troubleshooter. So as I said yesterday, when something goes wrong in your home, you call in a plumber to get the machine repaired. Similarly, when you have a problem, we call upon God to solve the problems. So as I said yesterday, God doesn't solve our problems. That is not his function. God's function is to give us enough strength so that we will be able to confront the problems ourselves. See, instead of giving fish, if you are given a fishing rod, you can make a livelihood out of it. So God is one who gives a fishing rod, not giving fish. Fish will perish, but fishing rod, and if you teach him how to catch fish, you can live upon that. It's a very interesting concept here. God doesn't solve our problems. God is not somebody who is a troubleshooter who comes and solves all the worldly problems. God is somebody who teaches us, who inspires, gives us the spiritual strength to confront the problems, so that when we become spiritually strong enough, the problems are no more problems. Even the biggest crisis will cease to be critical. Sri Ramakrishna, at the beginning of the Gospel, gives a very important instruction to his disciple, Yam, the chronicler of this book. The instruction is this: whatever may be the intensity of the problems and the dilemmas that you are confronting, because Yam, as I said yesterday, Yam had left his home around midnight to commit suicide. He had a large family to look after. He was a highly educated man who was, for those times, he was extremely well educated. He was familiar with Western thought, literature, history, and also Eastern thought, and so on. Apart from being a well-educated man, he was himself was a student for life, reading books and mastering great classics. Now, such a man became terribly upset due to some simple family squabbles. Large family, extended family, they were all quarreling, fighting among themselves. And one night it became unbearable. He left his home, and his wife suspected something unpleasant. She also accompanied him. And he went around midnight. They walked for some time. Then they caught a horse carriage, reached the house of one of his close friends, who was not very welcoming in his attitude. So Yam didn't feel like staying there, and he came out, went and walked for some distance, woke up when a coachman and then traveled by another horse carriage, traveled for some distance, reached the home of his nephew, Siddheshwaramayanda, and who took him next day to Dakshineshwar. And one of the earliest instructions that he received from Sri Ramakrishna was this. Sri Ramakrishna didn't really know what all problems he was facing. Maybe Sri Ramakrishna could read his mind and said, whatever may be the problems you are facing, all your problems will vanish by the grace of God. Just as the big patches of clouds completely get scattered by powerful wind. Similarly, if you take the name of God, by the grace of God, by the grace of Guru, by the grace of teacher Sri Ramakrishna meant God. If you pray to God, all the problems will be solved. Problems which appear to be mountains will become anthills. That's what Sri Ramakrishna said. Now, that shows that God doesn't solve the problems. God gives us the strength to withstand the problems, so that what appeared to be a very big problem earlier now appears to be an ordinary inconvenience that we can easily take in our stride. That's I think.
Swami, Dakshinamurti said to have imparted truths in silence only.
Yes.
Nobody else seems to be doing that. Why?
No, Dakshinamurti, that's the Shankaracharya Stotra, Dakshinamurti Stotra, the Shiva teaching to his disciple through the medium of silence. There, the teacher was great, and who are his disciples? Sanaga, Sanandana, Sanat Kumara, great, ever liberated spiritual teachers themselves. They were his disciples. So, Yam was not like the disciples of Dakshinamurti. This is a Indian tradition. One aspect of Shiva, Shankaracharya has written famous hymn, Dakshinamurti Stotra, where the Lord is teaching his disciples through the medium of silence. But who are the disciples? The disciples themselves are world teachers, who are not actually in need of any teaching, who are themselves the ever liberated teachers. So that is possible. But See how Sri Ramakrishna taught Swamiji. Vivekananda was almost an agnostic who was not willing to accept Vedanta, I mean Advaita Vedanta, non-dualism. Sri Ramakrishna just touched him. And that was the beginning of Swami Vivekananda's conversion from an agnostic to the prophet of Neo Vedanta, what we call today. Now, but Sri Ramakrishna did not do that to Girichandra Ghosh or even to a great man like Esha Chandra Sen, who was a great intellectual, himself a great spiritual seeker. So that won't work with everyone. Sri Ramakrishna did not give a long sermon to Swami Vivekananda, just touched him. Swamiji was being skeptical about, oh, you Advaita, everything is Brahman, everything is Atman. So Swamiji was almost skeptical at that time. But Sri Ramakrishna knew that Vivekananda was a highly qualified spiritual seeker who could be taught by giving a glimpse of the reality. But Sri Ramakrishna did that only to Vivekananda, not to others. So Dakshinamurti could teach these great sages through the medium of silence. But that's not possible for that's not possible for ordinary people. They need some gross ordinary means of instruction, reading, constant striving, because they have not reached that level of spiritual fitness. Okay, now we'll conclude. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Hari Om Tat Sat.